In this video clip, I'm going to show you how to use that outline section of your notebook that you've set up. And you'll notice that I have the Stromberg text open to chapter 29. Again, that's just the chapter we happen to be using. We've already talked about how to use these objectives, how to use the key terms, and now we're up to the actual text that is starting here. And I'm going to use this to build an outline. So in my notebook, I'm going to go to the section that I've entitled Outlines. Now, again, if I were doing this just for my own learning, I would eliminate this section because my notes would take the place of this. But I want you to see this in case it's something that you would find useful. So I turn on over here to a page in my outline section, and I'm going to go ahead and give this one a title so that we know which chapter we're dealing with. And let me get a pen instead of with this split screen, my writing may be a little bit bad, but you'll get the idea. So I'm going to call this chapter 29. You could even write the title of the chapter if you wanted to. And I'm going to go immediately to Roman numeral 1. And the first thing I see here is this disorders of the abdomen and bowel. So I'm going to write that in title case. Disorders of the abdomen and bowel. Now what this is doing, it's allowing my brain to slowly process what's in this chapter. And I will tell you that I can't talk and write at the same time. So if I make a mistake, I apologize in advance. I have to be very careful with my spelling. So you notice that Roman numeral 1 is that dark green color. One of the things that is a disorder of the abdomen and bowel is, I'm using an Arabic A here, diarrhea or constipation. I've always had a problem spelling diarrhea, so I have to look back. I personally would take the time to spell this stuff correctly. It's just good practice. So just in writing this down, I can see that one of the disorders of the abdomen and bowel that I'm supposed to know about is diarrhea and constipation. And I'm getting this just by following those headers. So let's scroll on over in the page, and then we're still under this particular condition, we get to the etiology. In other words, what causes these things? Well, these are two different things. They're two different conditions. So I would go ahead and break them out by the two conditions. So not only am I telling myself how this chapter's structured, I'm sort of learning in the process that there are two conditions here under this one header, and that's organizing this information into my brain. So under etiology, again, we will come back at a later time and fill in what those actually are. What are the causes of each of those things? That would be another way to ask the question. What causes diarrhea? What causes constipation? And when I take my test, I should know both of those answers from memory. Okay, we're still under those two conditions, so I'm going to go with a number 2. And then we're talking about treatment and nursing management. And I would write the header. I would not take shortcuts. I would take the time to spell it out, because these headers that organize this book probably organize the exam bank as well. So it's a good idea to just know what they are. Okay, this is a fairly lengthy section. If you notice, it's 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. So since I'm not doing this actual studying at this point, I'm just outlining the chapter, I'm going to make space for 3 paragraphs, and I'm just going to skip a line for each of those. So when I come back to study this, I know that I need to find those 3 paragraphs. Each of those is going to have a main idea, and that's what I'm going to want to put here. But for right now, I'm just doing the outline. Okay, moving on over, I see that I come to a different type of header, irritable bowel syndrome. So that is not the same condition. We're shifting gears to a new condition. So I'm going to make that a point B, and I'm going to spell that out. Now, some teachers might tell you to go ahead and stop and fill in all of this information first. I would recommend filling this information in class. If I were taking Miss Herndon's class, I would do this outline beforehand, and then as she's lecturing in the class, I would fill in the points that go in these categories. You will learn much more, in my opinion, by listening to her lecture and absorbing the things that she's saying than you will by memorizing the textbook. But anyway, we're back to irritable bowel syndrome. So that is a condition separate from diarrhea and constipation. And even if I didn't know that from living life, I would know that by looking at the header in this textbook. It's in that blue color, and it's bigger than the etiology section that's coming up. But one thing I really like about this textbook is it follows that same pattern over and over. So we're going to look at what causes IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Anytime you have an acronym, I would go ahead and write that in just so you practice those. So leave some space there to explain that. And then this one gives us a second header on that same color scale. So it's patho, which is disease, and then physiology. Physio, structure, ology, study of. So it's the study of that disease structure. Always talk yourself through these big words to help you learn what they're saying, and you'll see patterns in those. Okay, again, I can read this paragraph and get that information, but I would much rather get that information from my instructor. I would rather listen to what he or she is saying and write that information in. I also see a table in this one, so I'm going to go ahead and add that one in because you always want to understand tables. Take the time to figure out what the table is talking about, what it's showing you, just so that for future reference you can come back to that if you need to. Okay, and then we move on to signs and symptoms. I'm still talking about IBS. So I'll leave a line, some space for class, and then add in the signs and symptoms. Okay, we're still under that IBS category. And then we have diagnosis. And then we have treatment and nursing management. Now, these things that are being repeated over and over, I would probably develop a symbol so that I didn't have to keep writing that out. Once you realize that it's repeated several times, you could even use the acronym here, TNM, or something that makes sense to you, but you want to leave a space for it so that you can come back and write in the things you need to remember. And then we get to this thing called a focused assessment. Now, it is still talking about irritable bowel syndrome, so I'm just going to include it here, just as another header. And if you notice, I haven't read anything in this textbook. All I'm doing is understanding how the chapter is organized. Now, I'm going to show you an alternate way to do this in just a few minutes, or in the next clip, actually. But I wanted to show you this method for those of you who may want to use it. And then we have complementary and alternative therapies. Now, look at how much time and space is devoted to IBS. This is one that I'm going to want to study for my test. If they've devoted all these pages in a textbook, they're probably going to ask me some questions about it on the test. And then we have yet another one. We have number 9, which is clinical cues. And if my instructor didn't talk about that in class, I would come back to this section and fill that in. So when I bring my notes to class, anything that my instructor talks about, I'm going to write that down because the instructor knows the test. If the instructor doesn't touch on a particular topic, or maybe there's a fire drill and you miss 30 minutes of class, you may have to come back and find those bits and pieces. But at least you're going to have a place for them, and you know that you need to go back and look at them. Okay, and then we move on to diverticula, which is yet another of those blue topics. So let's look back here. You notice that I can't highlight on this one, but there's irritable bowel syndrome. We knew that diarrhea or constipation were of those headers. So then we're ready for another one of our Arabic letters. So I'm going to go ahead to my next page, which of course I don't have. Let me duplicate that one. Bear with me just a second. Let me erase this so that we can just keep going. We are up to letter C. So let's make that become letter C. That's going to go with that big blue header of diverticula. And you get the idea. Arabic numeral 1 under diverticula. Let me be sure here is that word again, etiology. And this time they've chosen to group pathophysiology here too. So let's do what they did. So if you're in class and you realize, oh, I didn't write anything down for, let's go back one. I didn't write anything for diagnosis of IBS. I've missed this somehow. This is where you ask your instructor, could you tell me what I need to know about the diagnosis of IBS? We are just pulling facts from the textbook here, which is great in terms of learning the textbook. It's not helping me much with critical thinking. My other method hopefully will help a little bit with that. But at least this is giving me a starting point. Then we have signs, symptoms, and diagnosis. And I want to call your attention to something on this page, on the textbook page. You can absolutely use shorthand here. To me, this will always be diagnosis, and rather than write out the word, I use my own shorthand. That is absolutely acceptable here. One thing on this textbook page, on the left side of the page, you see that big section in bold. I need to pay attention to that because that bold is there for a reason. So whatever is in bold needs to be noted. If it's not covered in your class lecture, you definitely want to work that into your notes. Okay, and then here's a think critically thing. I would definitely count those. I have found that very often those become the basis of test questions. So don't skip over that just because it looks a little different. I would pay a little more attention to it. Especially it's asking a question. It's asking you to compare the signs and symptoms of diverticulitis with those of irritable bowel syndrome. And this is where I would pull in a Venn diagram. I would bring up this circle and this one, and I would label one of them IBS and one of them diverticulitis, and I would compare those. So I would list all of the things that are true of diverticulitis, all of the things that are true of IBS, and then in this section, it's the things that are true of both. So that's a way, anytime it asks you for similarities and differences, I like a Venn diagram. And there's absolutely no reason that you can't put that right smack in the middle of your outline if that helps you. If your instructor is telling you about two different medicines, you're comparing those, draw yourself a Venn diagram and organize your thoughts that way. It will help. Graphic organizers are wonderful. Okay, number 4 here, we're still under diverticulitis or diverticula, treatment and nursing management. Again, this is not my preferred method of note-taking. It's the method I was taught, and I have used it with very good results, but it's not the way I'm wired. I'm going to show you my way very soon. Okay, the nutrition considerations. And let's say that you see a video in class here. Let's say that your instructor decides to show you a video. Considerations. You could put a link to that video in your notes right down there where you could watch that video again. Anything like that you can add into your notes, and that's very helpful. Okay, we're up to Arabic D, and I'm not going to go that would be intestinal obstruction, but I think you get the idea of what I'm doing, just using the headings in my text to outline my chapter before class, and then bring this with you to class. And as your teachers are explaining these concepts, fill in the blanks here. And that will help you have a structure of your material. But the filling in your blanks by listening to the teacher is what's going to help you learn the material. I think you will be much better served by doing it that way than by memorizing the pages of the textbook. Because when you're writing, your brain is having to process things differently, and that's what will help you to remember. Okay, I'm going to stop this video, and then in the next clip, I will show you how I would take notes, and you can decide if either of those methods works best for you or not at all. But I'll stop this video and see you soon for the next one.